For those of you who have the time to question the faith of others, are you confident enough that Allah, as the sole judge, has accepted your own ibadah and deeds, such that you have now been ordained the standing to question mine and of others? I speak today as the outgoing Chief Justice of Malaysia. My colleagues and I have, in at least one part of our judicial careers, faced these challenges. Additionally, as Chief Justice, I have carried the burden, image, and overall responsibilities of the judiciary for almost 6 years. And what a task it has been, one that I do not envy the next person who should carry it. As Chief Justice, I have been criticized, vilified, been labeled an Islamic or an enemy of Islam. My husband, unfairly so, has been used against me in some applications to not only have me recused, but more generally, to embarrass me and my colleagues. None of them have or ever will pass the test of my conscience, and praise be to Allah, I have not once lost sleep over these comments. When I was appointed the first female Chief Justice of Malaysia, someone asked me, what would you do if the executive or any other influential party demands that you decide a case in a certain way? What would you do if history were to repeat itself? You are faced with requests to appoint certain persons as judges or make decisions that you know to be wrong in law, but right for the party with the vested interest. Before I answer the question, let me stress this. A judge, whether male or female, must always decide justly, fairly, and objectively. I am happy to share with you today what my answer to that long question was and still remains till today. It is this. I am here to do my job. I never coveted for it, but by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I was entrusted to lead the judiciary. It is an extremely intimidating position to hold, but upon accepting the appointment, I am fully committed to doing it properly. I will not bend or bow to any person, no matter how high and mighty, to do what he or she demands of me. My only master is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I have utmost faith in my religion, which holds me accountable only to Allah on Judgment Day. I always intend on fulfilling my oath of office, especially in ensuring the Constitution reigns supreme, and I am guided by no other considerations than the law and the facts of any case within the bounds of judicially established principles. In the soon-to-be 6 years within which I have served as Chief Justice, I have held firmly to the belief that what needs to be improved shall be improved, and what does not need to change shall remain. I do not believe that each time a person takes office, they have to override or cancel past policies that have proved useful for the sake of doing so. In this regard, I have retained whatever policies that were left behind at the time I took over that enhanced the judicial institution. As you recall, a lot has happened in the past 6 years alone than the decade before it combined. Only a year into my tenure in 2020, we were hit with the COVID-19 pandemic. Everything was put on hold and everyone was told to stay at home, but we all knew that justice cannot come to a standstill. We embarked upon digitalization and judicial modernization as early as 2009 under the leadership of the then Chief Justice Tun Zaki bin Tun Azmi. But in just the 1 year between 2020 and 2021, with the help of all the right parties, including Parliament, the Bar, and the AGC, the Malaysian judiciary did more for the cause of technology than it could have done in the 10 years between 2009 and 2019. Our country was also faced with constitutional issues beginning with the then Prime Minister's resignation in 2020. What then followed was a series of constitutional suits concerning, among other things, a declaration of emergency in the face of the pandemic, and overall, everyone witnessing the Constitution being tested to its limits. Generally, it has been an eventful almost 6 years. I think it is natural for anyone who has been through such an eventful period to feel wistful at the prospects of retirement. However, I, more than feeling sad, instead feel an overarching sense of relief. I am looking forward to retirement as I sincerely believe that I will get to leave the judiciary in a better place from when my colleagues and I led it, with a chance to spend more time with my grandchildren and to deepen my connection to my faith. As such, in this last holy speech of mine, I enjoin you to reflect upon two things that I believe to be of paramount importance moving forward. The first of these is the state of our constitutional law. The second has to do with judicial appointments. Arguably, the most important and foundational features of the Constitution are Articles 4 Clause 1, 5 Clause 1, and 8 Clause 1. The latter two jointly guarantee the right to life and personal liberty and equality before the law. The former ensures that the Constitution reigns supreme and that any law passed after Merdeka Day is void to the extent that it is inconsistent with the Constitution. We must remember that unlike many other written constitutions, ours was not won from Great Britain on the battlefield or drafted after a bloody internal revolution. It was negotiated by our leaders of the time. In the United Kingdom, they effectively only have one rule which forms their unwritten constitution, and that is Parliament is supreme. This means that Parliament, as the collective representative of the people, has the supreme power to make any law, even to the extent that it changes fundamental constitutional provisions in Great Britain. The Constitution and the law there is, in effect, whatever Parliament says it is. The same is not true here. Here, Parliament is not supreme. Here, Parliament itself is enacted by the Constitution, and its powers are demarcated between itself and the state legislatures. While these legislative powers are broad, they remain circumscribed and expressly enumerated in legislative entries to the 9th schedule of the Constitution. When I took office as the Chief Justice, 3 celebrated judgments had already been pronounced by the Federal Court. These are, as you know, firstly, Semenye Jaya, secondly, Indira Gandhi, and finally, Al-Manudu, the trilogy of cases. These cases collectively held what I believe is right in law, which is that the supremacy of the Constitution is exercised by the superior courts as the only collective body with the inherent power to do justice by interpreting the Constitution. It was essentially held in the trilogy of cases that judicial power cannot be curtailed in the manner, or rather in the way the amended Article 121 Clause 1 suggests. What these cases cemented is what is now known as the doctrine of constitutional supremacy, in that any law passed by Parliament, even law seeking to amend the Constitution, can be struck down as being void. In the years that followed the trilogy of cases, we saw numerous challenges to ouster clauses. In opposing the challenges, the argument advanced was that the constitutional amendments made in 1988 effectively whittled down judicial power in Article 121 Clause 1, such that the courts were required to abide by and their powers be circumscribed by federal law. Sometime into my tenure, the Federal Court finally held in 2 cases, i.e. Nivesh Nair and Dinesh Tanapil, that Article 121 Clause 1 cannot be read in the way it was once read to make the courts subservient to Parliament. These decisions were not based on a new invention. They were decided purely upon the application or expansion of principles established in the trilogy of cases. As such, the constitutional decisions in the past 6 years have only permanently endorsed the notion that there are basic features of the Constitution that cannot be altered or taken away, even by way of a constitutional amendment. And even if such constitutional amendment was made, it can be struck down under Article 4, Clause 1. Since then, many have come to misunderstand these decisions. Some misinformed parties take the position that these cases mean that Parliament cannot ever amend the Constitution. I shall not repeat the explanations given in recent judgments that clearly explain why this position is wrong, but I will say this. The Constitution is not just a mere collection of words. It is a blueprint as much as it is a living reminder of our history. Due to the nature of its founding, including the fact that the Constitution renders Parliament subordinate to it, the Constitution is greater than the sum of its words. Upon an examination of the historical documents and the circumstances of the formation of Malaya and later Malaysia, it is surmised that some fundamental features of the Constitution include Islam as the religion of the Federation, the supremacy of the Constitution, the national language of the Federation, the special position of the Malays and natives of any of the states of Sabah and Sarawak, a democratic constitutional monarchy with 3 branches of government being the executive, the legislatures, federal and state, and an entirely independent judiciary, and the written guarantee of fundamental rights as well as their protection. These categories are not closed. To whittle away any of these features would be to destroy the essence of the Constitution itself. It does not mean Parliament cannot amend the Constitution. The procedure for this is clear. What it does mean is that Parliament, being subordinate to the Constitution, cannot, even with the requisite majorities and consents, directly or indirectly eradicate these features at the risk of destroying the Constitution and Malaysia itself. It means that Parliament cannot at any time use the constitutional procedure for amendment by, for example, eliminating the special position of the Malays, abolish the monarchy, or even, for that matter, remove Islam as the religion of the Federation. The existence of this doctrine of constitutional supremacy that upholds not just the words and explicit provisions of the Constitution, but protects its spirit, implied principles, and design is an indelible principle of our rule of law. This is where the ouster clause cases come into sharp focus. Who is to ensure that the Constitution is preserved and its supremacy upheld? It must be the superior courts. Ouster clauses were challenged on the ground that they insulated the executive from any form of meaningful review by the courts. The argument in support of their constitutionality was premised on the ground that the courts were in effect bound to comply with the ouster clauses under the amended Article 121 Clause 1 as they are federal law. It is for this reason that the amendment to Article 121 Clause 1 was argued to be unconstitutional and that it ought to be struck down under the doctrine of constitutional supremacy, which was earlier known as the basic structure doctrine. Recent decisions ultimately held that the amendment to Article 121 Clause 1 was not unconstitutional because, when read in its proper context, with Article 4 Clause 1, the amendment did not abridge judicial power. In this regard, while Article 4 Clause 1 rendered all laws in violation of the Constitution void to the extent of their inconsistency, in effect, such a declaration of supremacy would be meaningless if federal law, in the form of ouster clauses, could come in the way of any assessment on the validity of laws so passed or any executive actions taken in the name of those laws. The application of the doctrine of constitutional supremacy is not just confined and applicable to the judiciary through Article 121, Clause 1. Although litigation on this doctrine has mostly been in respect of Article 121, Clause 1, the application of the constitutional supremacy bears implications to constitutional features far deeper than that, such as to all aspects of our government, our governance, and our constitutional identity that collectively make Malaysia the country it is. In the last 6 years, litigation and judicial decisions have affirmatively determined that the doctrine of constitutional supremacy is here to stay. Litigation should only develop now to the extent of what those features include and whether they have been eroded in any way. Any future decision that denies the existence of the doctrine of constitutional supremacy or which seeks to re-establish now overruled cases that dismiss the doctrine would amount to a major regression in the development of our constitutional jurisprudence. Apart from the doctrine of constitutional supremacy, there have been other significant constitutional developments. For instance, the Federal Court decision in CCH has strengthened the plight of stateless children who were found to be abandoned at birth and whose mothers cannot be identified. This decision, I believe, has re-established the scope and extent of all the applicable constitutional provisions, as well as the principles that must apply to the most basic of rights, the right to citizenship. Still, in the realm of constitutional law, the last 6 years have also seen major litigation on the extent and scope of powers of the federal and state legislature. These decisions include the judgments of the Federal Court in Iki Putra, Sis Forum, Wong Shikai, and Nick Allen. As mentioned earlier, Parliament and the state legislatures are the creations of the Constitution, and their powers of legislation are circumscribed by the 9th schedule. Apart from what is contained in the concurrent list, the Constitution is more than clear that absent certain circumstances that were inapplicable in those cases, Parliament or state legislature cannot make laws on matters that fall within the purview of the other. In all those decided cases, the simple and straightforward question was whether the state legislatures in those cases were empowered to make certain criminal laws. It was found, as has always been the case, that only Parliament can make criminal laws of a general nature to be applied to all citizens. The states in those cases justified those laws on the ground that they only made those laws in respect of Muslims in those states. Upon an analysis of the pith and substance of those laws, the Federal Court agreed in all those cases that the laws in question, not all in Nick Allen, were not only applicable to Muslims in principle, but pertained to general criminal laws. On this basis, and consonant with Article 4, Clause 1 of the Federal Constitution, the Federal Court did its duty by striking down those laws for being in excess of the powers of the state legislatures to make those laws, and which powers rightfully belong to Parliament. That is all it was. Yet, you would invariably have seen that some parties spun those decisions to appear as if the judiciary or some judges within it, including me, are anti-Islam. Some even question my faith as a Muslim. I woke up every day praying and hoping that the most beneficent and most merciful Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts my ibadah and deeds. It is not for me to question the faith of others because, in the first place, I will never know until the day of reckoning whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has accepted my oath. And so, I will not bring myself to stoop down the level of these scurrilous attacks, and instead, My only response to them is this one rhetorical question. For those of you who have the time to question the faith of others, are you confident enough that Allah, as the sole judge, has accepted your own ibadah and deeds, such that you have now been ordained the standing to question mine and of others? I stand firmly by what it is I do as a judge and chief justice, and I will continue to believe in what is right. The spin doctors, naysayers, and critics can say what they will and turn something noble into a purported vilification of Islam. But in the end, I hold dearly to the dictates of Allah as per the Holy Quran. O you who believe, stand out firmly for justice as witnesses to Allah, even as against yourselves or your parents or your kin, and whether it be against rich or poor, for Allah can best protect both. Follow not the lusts of your hearts, lest you swerve, and if you distort justice or decline to do justice, verily Allah is well acquainted with all that you do. Chapter 4, verse 135. Apart from constitutional law, there have also been significant developments in the realm of civil law and criminal law. There are too many to state. I will say that at least in my court and with my colleagues, every personality, regardless of his or her status, has been accorded like treatment and has received judgment appropriately. This has been the case in spite of all and every attempt to stymie or stifle the cause of justice. I am not the only one who is soon to retire. Many of my esteemed colleagues will soon retire as well. We will leave you to judge whether the landmark cases that have been passed in all fields in the last 6 years have met the standards of justice. All we can do now is entrust all future generations of judges, lawyers, prosecutors, and federal counsel to further progress the development of the law in line with established principles. It is here that I wish to remind judges to remember their oaths of office and adhere strictly to the doctrine of stare decisis.